Remember when we thought this was peak video game graphics? Let's go back.
Tamagotchi, the Y2K.
Let me take you back to a specific time in the 1990s. It's Friday and you just got off school. You have no responsibilities and the entire weekend is ahead of you. You invite a few friends over and order a pizza from Pizza Hut. The fridge is stocked full of some mellow yellow. Unopened bags of Doritos 3Ds and Pizzeria's pizza chips lay on the table before you. The Nintendo 64 is hooked up to the television and you're ready to battle with your friends in some Mario Party and Mario Kart late into the night. You don't know this in the moment, but these will be some of your fondest childhood memories. If nostalgia didn't just hit you like a blue shell in Mario Kart 64, you probably didn't grow up in the 90s. There are many videos on YouTube about the Nintendo 64, but most of those just cover the history, which I will quickly touch on, but this is more of a love letter to a video game console that changed mine and many other children's lives. Before getting into my own personal memories of the Nintendo 64, I want to quickly talk about this console's importance at the time of its release, for anyone who wasn't around during the early years of the console wars. The year is 1996 and the console wars are in full effect. Lines have been drawn in the pixelated sand as Sega's Saturn is competing against Sony's PlayStation for home gaming supremacy. Nintendo is late to the game, but they're working on a weapon that will end the war. The Nintendo 64 is unveiled and people's minds simultaneously explode. Now I say this jokingly now, but at the time it really did blow people's minds upon seeing the graphics. These were well-rendered, three-dimensional graphics that no one in the industry had seen before. To put in a bit of context, Mario went from looking like this to this.
Hello!
Even more amazing was that this was a company that sat on the sidelines for a few years upon the next generation, just in order to get a console right. Now in the gaming industry, if something's unfinished, they just slap an early access onto it and call it a day. I'm not pointing any fingers, but Bethesda. Finally, on September 29th, 1996, the Nintendo 64 was released in North America. It hit the market with a $199.99 price tag, which is about $400 today, and had a similar reaction to the ones we just saw with the PlayStation 5. Not only was the N64 a critical success for Nintendo, praised by tech and gaming publications around the world, but it was a financial success being released just in time for the 1996 Christmas rush, and boy did kids go insane for them. As for me, I was only 5 years old during this time, and on Christmas morning I unwrapped a gift from my uncle that would be one of the greatest gifts I'd ever received, and this was my reaction. I still remember unwrapping the Nintendo 64 and seeing Mario and Bowser on the side of the box and having no clue who they were, or what this was. I just said thanks and then sat it aside. I knew what video games were at the time. I would watch my dad play the Sega Genesis, and to me that was the only device you could play a video game on. It was like a television. If you wanted to watch TV, you needed to buy a TV. If you wanted to play a video game, you had to buy a Sega. So what the hell was this Nintendo? I don't know who, but someone in my family set the console up in the basement, and I finally sat down to try it out. It looked so foreign to me. The controller looked like it wasn't meant to be held by human hands. Plus it had an analog stick right in the center of it, which was something I had never seen before. It also had this weird open space on the back of it, that I would later come to find out was for a rumble pack. This may sound crazy to the current generation of gamers, but having a vibrating controller was a luxury back then, and you had to buy an extension for it. Once I was done ogling at the controller, I booted that bad boy up and there was no turning back. I was now a loyal member of the Nintendo 64 army in the console wars. Now I want to get into the most important part of the Nintendo 64, the games, because that's where most of my memories lie. I think it would be best to start with the ones I owned, and why not start with the one that I got the most mileage out of, no pun intended, Mario Kart 64.
Mario Kart 64!
Mario Kart 64 is by far my favorite racing game of all time. And to be fair, that's mostly because I'm not a big fan of racing games. I had two controllers, the original gray one and the designated Player 2 controller in yellow. If you thought you could come into my house and play with the gray controller, you were very much mistaken. I played the game a lot with my dad because he loved it too. My main was my boy Yoshi, and my dad always played as Toad. They were both small but fierce. For many years I believed I was really good at Mario Kart. That is until I saw speedrunners online. People find exploits like finishing a lap on Calamari Desert in under 10 seconds. The only exploit I ever knew about was jumping off the side of Rainbow Road and trying to land on the track below, which I probably only did a grand total of once in my life. One thing I remember specifically about Mario Kart 64 was how to be a dick on Wario Stadium. If you had a shell or a lightning bolt power-up, you waited for your opponent to get right before the big jump and then hit them with it. They wouldn't have enough power to get over the jump and fall down, losing a lot of time. I rarely did this just to be a good sport, unless I was desperate. I broke out the same Nintendo 64 recently and played some Mario Kart 64 on it, and it's aged really well and it's still playable. However, it reminded me of all the obstacles that were a pain in the ass. How I didn't rage quit on Banshee Boardwalk many times is something I should put on my resume to flaunt my patience. Then there were those damn exploding snowmen on Frappe Snowland and those penguins on Sherbert Land. Look at them. Look into their evil eyes. They knew what they were doing. They're the reason I threw the baby penguin off the cliff in Super Mario 64. What? Don't act like you didn't do it either. I didn't even mention Battle Mode where everyone met up to test the strength of their friendships, but let's move on. I own 3 other games, Mario Tennis, which I don't have strong memories of playing, Mario Party, and Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. A quick memory I have of playing Star Wars Shadows of the Empire was sitting eating Taco Bell while they had their Star Wars promotion on. I was piloting my ship while sipping on the Darth Maul cup and digging into some Fry Supreme. I had just fully immersed myself in the Star Wars fandom at that point, and I remember taking a sip and thinking, life doesn't get much better than this. The funny thing about playing Star Wars Shadows of the Empire back then, though, was I never knew how to progress. So I spent most of my time just replaying that first level, trying to tie the AT-ATs with a rope on the back of my ship. I didn't quite understand progression in video games yet, and I wouldn't understand them until Grand Theft Auto 3 many years later. Mario Party, on the other hand, is a game I played nearly as much as Mario Kart. If I didn't have anyone to play with, I would sit and play against the AI opponents who could be real cutthroats at times. I'm talking about you, Peach. For some reason, I always ate Ruffles chips while playing Mario Party. Now, whenever I have Ruffles, I associate it with that game. Fingers getting all oily and all over the analog stick and leaving a shine behind on the surface of the controller. But I swear it made me better. The one very specific thing I remember about this game is this minigame. It was a wind-up Shy Guy doll where you had to spin the stick around as many times in 10 seconds to see how far you would fly. This is also where me and many other kids fucked up the palms of our hands because that was the best technique to spin the analog stick. A friend of mine back then said his mom did it and was able to spin it so fast she got Shy Guy to go all the way around the room and land back on the table. I still don't believe him. Speaking of friends, let's talk about my best friend growing up, Nicky. He was also a big Nintendo 64 fan, and whenever he came over he would bring 2 games, Super Smash Bros. And GoldenEye 007. I'm not going to talk about Super Smash Bros. That much because it's a game I never really got into, so I don't remember a lot about it. I only remember playing as Jigglypuff, and I think that was because I was watching the anime at the time and probably just hit the Jigglypuff episode. GoldenEye 007 is a whole nother story though. It was a game I never owned but played a lot because of my friend. It was mind-blowing and the first game I ever played in a first-person perspective. Sorry Doom fans, I didn't play that until later in life. The only thing I remember about the story was the first sequence where you're hiding in the vents and pop out in the bathroom because for me, this game was all about the multiplayer aspect. I remember playing against my friend on that specific level and just filling the bathroom with remote mines. I faced the wall so he couldn't look at my screen to see where I was, and as soon as he walked in the bathroom, I'd pull the trigger. I guess you could say I was an OG camper. However, GoldenEye multiplayer was more of a sandbox for my friend and I. It was exploring the levels and seeing what exactly we could do in it. It would be like, okay, you jump on here and see if you can stay on top of my head and we can get you over that wall. This was well before I ever learned about glitches, but it seems like we were actively trying to find glitches back then without even knowing it. Trying to find the limits of the game. Okay, so we covered my games, we talked a bit about my friends' games, but one of the most memorable aspects of owning a Nintendo 64 back then was going to Blockbuster and renting a game for 7 days. I remember renting games like Earthworm Jim, Paper Mario, WWF No Mercy, South Park Rally, and South Park Chef's Love Shack. Sometimes I would rent games multiple times, and you had to make sure you got the exact same cartridge so your save file was still on it. Speaking of save files, sometimes you would rent a game and there would be save files with the most violent offensive name saved on it. Thinking back, I probably didn't know what they meant at the time. But that makes it very clear that the same gamers who will talk about sleeping with your mom on Call of Duty voice chat were also around back then. There were 3 specific games I rented multiple times that I wanted to discuss, and the first 2 are Mario Party 2 and Pokemon Snap. Mario Party 2 confused the hell out of me the first time I saw it sitting on that shelf at Blockbuster. It was Mario Party, but it was a sequel? I had no idea video games could have sequel. It was unheard of in my little world. Bringing it home and realizing it was the same playstyle but with all new boards and minigames was so refreshing after playing the first Mario Party over and over again. It was like having Peach's cake and eating it too. Ooh, that does not sound good. I meant the cake from Mario Party 1. Pokemon Snap, on the other hand, I rented because, as I mentioned earlier, I was a big fan of Pokemon growing up. At that point, I only knew Pokemon games as little pixelated characters inside my Game Boy. The idea of seeing a Pokemon in 3D environment was fascinating to see. Technology could never progress further than this. It was such a chill and relaxing game, but like my time with Star Wars, I'm pretty sure I never progressed off that first island. Again, I wonder how I was so patient back then. The final game I want to talk about in this video is the one that I rented so many times that it probably would have been cheaper just to buy. That game is what I would argue is the greatest launch title for a console ever, Super Mario 64. I don't think anyone discussing the Nintendo 64 can get through that conversation without talking about this title. I talked about it at the beginning of this video briefly, but this was Nintendo's crown jewel when it came to displaying the 64's capabilities. This was the first time Mario was rendered in 3D, so many weren't sure how the two-dimensional platforming gameplay of the original series would translate into this new era, but it translated seamlessly. Everything about it, from the gameplay to the music to the star system, was a breath of fresh air for the franchise while still staying true to its roots. It's also one of the few games where a rumor turned out to be true. The rumor that Yoshi was on top of the roof of the castle, and you bet your ass he was chilling up there. Super Mario 64 was another game I struggled with at first because I didn't understand that some of the doors you needed to acquire a certain amount of stars to access. I would try to get through those doors and get frustrated thinking, why in the hell would you put doors in this game if you couldn't use them? This is another game on my long list of unfinished Nintendo games. However, I did play it on the Nintendo Switch 3D All-Stars, and it holds up. Sure, it doesn't handle as well as Mario Odyssey, which I would say is my favorite Mario game, but it isn't too far removed. I do plan on finally finishing this game when I have the time, and I'll be sure to let you all know. These are just a few of the reasons the Nintendo 64 had a major impact on my childhood, and I'm sure many of you have memories of your own. Whether it be in games I've played or games that I never played, like Donkey Kong 64 or The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. The N64 stands the test of time as a must-play for any video game fan. Despite the fandom and the industry growing exponentially in the past 3 decades, the N64 still ranks in the top 20 for the highest-selling gaming consoles, with nearly 33 million units sold. So I know I'm not the only one who shares these feelings. What was your favorite Nintendo 64 game and memory? Let me know in the comments below. And if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Sega may very well do what Nintendo don't, but only one company has stood the test of time. And with that, I think there's only one thing left to say.
So long, Bowser.